Okay, good evening, folks. It is 6:05, I believe, and it is Tuesday, October 5th. We're in the council chambers at 75 North Bonson Street, and I am calling this work session of the Common Council to order. We'll start with roll call.
Isaac. Here. Lynn.
Here.
Yeah.
And I'm here.
Eileen. Jason is excused.
Here.
All right.
Jason is busy tonight being a football coach. Football? Soccer?
I think soccer.
Okay,
Don't quote me.
some kind of coach.
Could be football because I think it is football.
I thought it was football, but then I thought, yeah, I think it was football. All right. So there's only one item on our agenda tonight, and that is a work session for the 2022 Capital Improvement Plan budget. So we have talked about the capital improvement plan and seen a document that's got lots of $60 million worth of projects over the next 5 years. So tonight we're going to get down to what can we afford and how do we do some of these projects, or where are, so Adam?
You got it. So yeah, what we're here tonight is obviously to go over kind of the first, what I would say is the first official kind of 2022 budgetary meeting. So as you know, as council members, you have been spending the last kind of couple of months, starting in August, going over what is a little bit of a different approach than we've done in the past with the capital improvement plan. This is more of a definitely comprehensive plan. As you know, we've seen in the council packet where, as Council President Doss indicated, it really is kind of throwing in everything that we, with looking into what we really should be doing as a city. This is kind of the next step. So what we do now is we start to analyze, those requests and then, benchmark them against what we have done historically in the past. And then kind of look at what we anticipate, or what I anticipate as the city manager, how we can fund some of those and what potentially we may not. So obviously, as the council, you guys have the ability to kind of tweak things or change things as you see fit. So really, this is just a recommendation kind of from myself after meeting with all of staff of how we can kind of do things. So there's a presentation that typically we do. I have it in front of you. We also have it up here on the screen for anybody in attendance. But this is obviously something that we will eventually put out onto the website. So anybody from our residents who are interested can kind of look at it and obviously ask us questions. So again, just kind of what it goes over is the budgetary timeline. So again, this is Tuesday, October 5th. So we're looking at the CIP budget. Then on Monday, October 11th, the Airport Commission again will start to be reviewing and finalizing their budget. Tuesday, October 12th will be the first presentation to the council by myself as the city manager, just kind of letting you know some of the trends that we're seeing, things that we're looking at potentially doing in the budget and how that has the impact. Then obviously the next day is the Water and Sewer Commission, kind of looks at their portion of the budget and makes any recommendations and approvals. Then again, on Tuesday, October 19th, we have another session where we kind of review the operation side of things, look over the information. Tuesday, October 26th, we have another budgetary review session if needed. And then we start doing kind of the public notice information, getting prepared for November. On November 15th, we have the city manager presentation of the budget to the public. And then on Tuesday, November 23rd, we hold the public hearing for the budget and then ask the council to adopt it so that we can meet all of these statutory deadlines. So again, the highlights that we're going to kind of go over tonight is, again, just briefly talk about what is a capital improvement plan, the funding sources that typically are involved with a capital improvement plan. We're going to look at the 2022 capital improvement plan as a whole. Then we're going to get kind of into the nitty gritty. We're going to look at the 2022 capital improvement plan request breakdowns, look at the historical funding that's been done, and then get into the recommendations, and then obviously answer any questions or discussion that you might have. So again, just to kind of recap, what is capital improvement planning? So a capital improvement plan contains all the individual capital projects, equipment, purchases, and major studies for a local government. In conjunction with construction and completion schedules and in consort with financing plans, the plan provides a working blueprint for sustaining and improving the community's infrastructure. It coordinates strategic planning, financial capacity, and physical development. A CIP stands as the epicenter of a government's planning, public works, and finance departments. So again, the CIP typically includes the following information: a listing of the capital projects, equipment, and major studies, a ranking of these projects, a financing plan and how you would do that. Again, it's a plan, not necessarily a budget, a timetable for the construction or completion of these projects, and then again, a project justification. It usually has classifications, itemizations, and explanations for. Again, as we talked about in 2021, the city of Platteville moved from a capital improvement budget to a more comprehensive capital improvement plan process. So just to kind of recap again, funding sources that are used to fund a capital improvement plan typically are done by general obligation bonds or GO bonds. So again, this is with council approval. The city borrows money for specific improvements by selling general obligation bonds. This is a flexible fund source that allows the city to maintain some of its highest priority capital assets and programs, particularly those that aren't eligible for any other fund source. The next level is property taxes. So it's revenue received from property tax payments to the city. Property taxes are mostly used for the operating budget, but city leadership allocates a certain amount for capital projects each year. Federal and state funds. So obviously this would be loans and grants from the federal and state government, including community development block grants, highway funding, and transportation enhancement grants. Then there's obviously reserve funds that can be utilized. So this can be transfers from the general fund reserve, can be utilized to supplement the amount of property taxes needed to fund capital projects. And then there's obviously other, which can sometimes be county grants, local impacts aids, private monies, or additional sources. So as we talked about, we have gone in a little bit of a different direction this year with the city and doing a full-fledged capital improvement plan. So if you recall, in that plan, there was a total of $8,654,792 worth of capital improvement projects submitted. And that does include water and sewer. That has been something that was a little bit different. It's typically that was kind of seen later. You guys now were definitely a part of that process. So splitting that out, $1,345,927 was requested to be funded by tax levy. $1,290,000 was requested to be funded by city borrowing. $487,265 was anticipated to be funded by grant support. $1,145,500 was anticipated to be funded by another source of funding. And $4,386,100 was anticipated to be funded by water and sewer revenue bonds.
Ken has a question.
Yes, sir.
This $1,145,000, mine says another source. I didn't catch what you meant by another source.
Another source of funding. So that could either be cash on hand, that could be somebody donating a bunch of money to the city, or that could be some other, county grant or whatever have you.
So it's unknown.
Correct. So it's anticipated we're getting it from somewhere else that is not necessarily city funds.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So historically, the city has allocated the following towards capital improvement planning. Typically, there's been about $700,000 to $750,000 that has been comprised of either property tax levy and also general fund reserve support in order to make up that cost. One of the other things that we have done historically is in regards to financial borrowing, it has consisted of levy supported principal being paid off in prior years. So for example, in 2021, we are estimated to pay off $1,275,000 in principal. So historically, what the city has done is we have not gone over that borrowing limit. We have stuck to that amount. So just something to keep in mind, a 1% increase in property taxes results in $47,000 for the general fund. So that just kind of gives you an idea that in order to be able to levy for projects, every 1% you increase the tax rate by generates $47,000 that can be used towards a source. Again, one of the things within this capital improvement plan, it does not include the total projects for the airport. What you've seen is we have estimated $15,000 every year being used as the local match. What they have to do with the airport is obviously it's FAA funded. So they have a specific kind of capital improvement process that they have to go through the Bureau of Aeronautics. And that has like a very separate list of projects and potential funding sources that they get. So we do not specifically include those actual amounts. We have just kind of kept the amount that we continue to put aside to help with those funds. So this next slide is basically just kind of a pie chart here that shows you the breakdown of all of the requests that were made. So as you can see with this, primarily our main requests are water and sewer projects and obviously DPW. Makes sense for the most part when you think about it. That's the water and sewer, which is our wastewater treatment plant, or any sewer lines or anything else, water lines that have to go into the streets. And then DPW primarily is street reconstruction. And then all of the other areas have specific, projects and areas that they're looking at. So the next thing that we want to kind of talk about a little bit is the historical CIP data. So obviously when we're talking about CIP and we're talking about borrowing and we're talking about geo bonds, we want to make sure that we are updating the council on all of our policies related to debt. So for instance, there is a state debt policy that is state statute that requires you cannot exceed 5% of your equalized value. So for 2021, the city of Platteville's equalized value is $761,224,200. So when you take the borrowing limit, which is what we have, times 5%, that equals a total borrowing amount that the city could have of $38,061,210. So as you can see, the principal outstanding in 2021 right now is at $20,492,022. So we're right at about 53.8%. So the good news is that we obviously have borrowing capacity. The bad news obviously is you never want to hit that borrowing capacity. So it is definitely good that if something were to happen that would be considered catastrophic for the city, there is the financial flexibility to obviously do something. Now what the city of Platteville has done obviously is gone a step further. We have our own self-imposed debt limit policy of 3.5%. This again is a way so that we are financially savvy and don't hit that 5%. We kind of force ourselves to stop. So what you can see here is, again, if you look at the equalized value, which is $761,224,200, and you take our 3.5%, that would be a $26,642,847 ceiling. So right now our principal outstanding again in 2021 is $21,873,840. So we're at about 82.1%. So again, in 2021, we are anticipating to retire about $1,275,000 in levy supported principal debt. So that again is the cap we have historically tried to stick to when thinking about borrowing for the next year. Any questions there?
Yeah. Can you tell me why the outstanding principal is different for the state as from the city?
So because there are still some payments that we have not made yet fiscally. So that's why there is a little bit of a difference. So I wanted to give you the exact number that we're at as of right now. So we do anticipate by the end of the year, we'll actually reduce that down to get to the amount.
Okay.
So the other thing obviously that we talk about is the general fund unassigned fund balance. So this again is a financial policy which requires the balance be maintained at 20% of budgeted general fund expenditures. So in 2020, our unassigned fund balance is at $3,294,328. So 41%. So definitely doing very well in ensuring that we have a fund balance that is plentiful, which does allow us some capacity to consider projects and continually utilize that to obviously cover the CIP, which we'll be talking about later. So again, what we're looking at this year is doing something a little different just because of the fact that we are a little higher in that policy than we have to be. So we're actually looking at the amount being $500,000 tentatively assigned to fund the 2022 CIP. For some of you newer council members, just to kind of give you some insight, you'll see this in future slides, but typically that number has kind of averaged between about $300,000. So this is a little bit of a difference. But again, just because of the fact that we do have that financial capacity and dealing with some of the budgetary impacts that we anticipate this year, with obviously still recovering from COVID and seeing increases in everything that you can think of, as you guys have seen with the markets. That's why we're kind of looking at that. So again, if we were to do that, this would anticipate leaving about $2,794,328, which again would represent about 33% of our 2021 general fund budget expenditures. So again, our limit is 20, we're at 33. So still being very financially responsible and ensuring that we have that capacity if we would need it. Any questions there?
I go, excuse me, if I go back a couple pages.
Yeah.
So I know the city's plan is not to borrow anything more than what they paid off in the prior year for the principal. Colin, right, I think last year due to one or two projects, I think we may have went above that.
We did, correct. Yep. So you'll see that in the next couple of slides, but good catch because that's something to consider. So as you'll kind of see, as Isaac pointed out, that's on this slider. You can kind of see that. So good catch. But what this is the historical CIP data going back to 2018. So for 2018, 2019, and 2020, you can see that is actual. So that is our financial audited actuals that we have put in here in regards to what we have funded through CIP. One of the things that's a little different this year that you haven't seen is I actually did include the water and sewer in here as well. So you guys can kind of see historically how we've been funding that. So what you can see here again, then in 2021 was the adopted budget. So the proposed budget for 2022. So what we're looking at is obviously we have a wheel tax that the city instituted that we're anticipating about $110,000, which you'll see is a little bit of a reduction than we've had in previous years. That's just something we're anticipating with the actual budgetary numbers that we've been seeing coming in. We want to plan for that. Intergovernmental revenues, that is a combination of obviously grant funding as well as ARPA funding. So, and we're going to get to that before we start going into the specifics. I have a slide that I created for you guys that kind of breaks out that. So we'll hit that in a second. Capital fund tax levy. So again, this is the general taxes that we raise specifically that are allocated to the capital improvement plan. So this year we're budgeting about 196,000, which as you can see is less than what we've done in previous years, but is in the ballpark. In 2019, we kind of had a similar number. The general fund transfer, again, this is a number where this is kind of fluctuated based on our financial ability to do things. So it's averaged between about 472. Again, you can see in 2021, we adopted about 300. This year in 2022, we're anticipating $500,000. Other sources of funding, again, this could be things that we talked about with is either cash on hand, using trust fund accounts, different things like that. Or if somebody wants to donate a whole bunch of money to the city, which we will always take, we will utilize that as well. So that's just something to kind of consider there. And then general obligation bonds are exactly to Isaac's point. This is the principal historically that we have paid off in the year before. So as you can see, it's been anywhere typically about 1.2 to 1.7. We did a little something last year that was different just due to the historical low rates and some of the projects that we wanted to kind of take on with Business Highway 151 and everything else. We actually exceeded that limit. So what you can see here is from the CIP, general side of things, we're anticipating about $3.5 million of total funding being needed to cover those projects. From the water and sewer side, this is something that currently right now we have our financial advisors doing kind of some deep dives into us and are working on our long range financial plan. So what we have in here really is an estimate of what we think we will be able to fund or potentially what we could fund. When we get that further information in the coming weeks, obviously then that is going to make some decisions. Either they will tell us that financially we're going to be able to handle that, or they're going to tell us no. And then obviously we're going to have to make some discussions of if there are projects then that would either have to be delayed or potentially cut in half. So obviously when we get more into kind of the budget conversations, we will continue as staff to update you on kind of what that means or what we're potentially seeing. But tonight is just kind of looking at an approach of giving them what we think we could potentially do and kind of seeing how those funding sources would play out. So understand that may change. Again, there's a couple of other areas. There's intergovernmental revenues. That primarily is going to be ARPA funding that you'll see there of 120,000. And then water and sewer earnings, that's obviously cash on hand. So that's using funds or reserve funds that we have to cover those costs. So potentially we're looking at an all-in total CIP budget of about $7,647,792. All right. So then, as you can see, is this another kind of graphical representation for you guys to show you CIP funding source breakdowns. So this, again, is going to show primarily what the other graph showed you. The two big areas that primarily take up the majority of our CIP are water and sewer and DPW. What you can see is out of those two areas, that is primarily the two fund accounts that require borrowing. So you're going to see that in the water and sewer side, that's going to be sewer revenue bonds or water revenue bonds. From the DPW side, that's going to be general obligation, kind of in those blue colors, blue and green. The rest of it then is obviously funded through either tax dollars, cash on hand, or potentially grants and payments and other sources. Okay, so before any questions there?
Nope, I was just gonna say Howard's an expensive guy.
He is.
Yeah.
We can't help. All right, so before we start going into kind of the recommendations, what I want to direct you guys to is this new sheet that you have in front of you, which is the 2022 CIP ARPA funding. and kind of talking with council leadership, we thought it would be a good idea to kind of present you with a little bit more of a breakdown specifically with ARPA, because there is a big decision we have to discuss and kind of think about as we go through the budget process this year. So if you remember, the city was essentially allocated about 1.2 roughly $1 million in ARPA funding. We went through a pretty extensive process where we had a couple of work sessions. We had a couple of information and discussion items on the council agenda to try to get feedback on potentially what we could use that funding for. So what you are seeing in here is kind of a breakdown of two things. Obviously, that funding comes in kind of two spurts. There was the original money we got in July, which is about 632,000. And then we're anticipating again sometime in either January or February. I think that's right. Is that right, Nicola? Roughly, yeah, that we're going to be getting that additional funding source. So as I started to look at kind of potentially how we could fund all of the projects that we truly need to do for the city in 2022, this was one area that I looked at. So specifically what you have here are the projects that made kind of the 2022 list and how they could be funded with ARPA dollars. So specifically, we have the City Hall Phase 3A renovation. We talked about $150, and what this renovation was talking about. Yep, go ahead, Ken. Did you have a question, or was that just?
No,
Oh,
just your misstatement, that's all.
oh, what did I misstate?
$150 instead of.
Oh, good catch, 150,000. So I wish it was $150. That'd be nice, right? Sorry. So $150,000 was the request. And again, this was to look at potentially the downstairs area. One of the big things out of there that we looked at was, instead of doing the entire project, focus more on the technology upgrades that we wanted to do in the council chambers, as well as potentially downstairs. So that's where you're looking in phase one. If you recall, we had allocated about $100,000 to go towards that project. So that now is in here as potentially being budgeted for that. We have $56,000 potentially that is going towards an IT upgrade. And that really is in two parts. It's because, again, if we're going to be looking at doing technology upgrades to the council chamber, as well as some rooms in City Hall, we need to make sure that the server is able to handle that. So it kind of makes sense that that would go hand in hand, that we would need to upgrade the server. So we've put some money into there towards that. The citywide camera system, same thing again. That was about $140,000 project. We had earmarked about $100,000 of ARPA phase one funds to go towards that. The other $40,000, if you recall, was something that we had in the 2021 CIP budget that we're going to be looking to carry over. So you'll see that kind of in future slides. Now, this is where obviously that comes to $256,000 that's out of phase one. Then what I put below this is the other areas that were allocated by the council for specific projects. So if you remember, we had $20,000 that was allocated towards Housing Authority grant, $194,000 towards the Stormwater Pond project. Now that changed a little bit. So what you'll see there is, if you look at that, we had allocated originally $250,000. The $56,000 for the IT upgrade is now coming out of that a little bit, because we are anticipating that cost will be a little less due to working with a couple of partners in regards to that project. The other thing then we have in there is $75,000 that we earmarked for housing development incentives that potentially could be given by the council. We put $13,000 aside for an HVAC study to look into this building in regards to the auditorium, in regards to COVID, and kind of looking at if there's upgrades we need to make there. And then again, we had set aside $75,000 to go towards broadband provider incentives. So right there, that's $377,000. When you take the 256 that's in this kind of presentation, plus the 377, that gets you to the 633 that essentially was earmarked for phase one. That makes sense with phase one. All right, so then phase two, what you're going to see in here as we talk further on tonight, are a couple of projects that potentially could make up the rest of the $632,000, 292. So particularly, we have DPW projects. There's two of them that we've earmarked. It's the Main Street culvert, as well as the Roundtree Branch steam bank stabilization. Again, those are specific infrastructure projects that would classify under ARPA funding. The other things then we looked at trying to fund specifically with some sorts of ARPA dollars were directly related to kind of COVID impacts and mitigation. So if you think about it, the sidewalk, that's one where if you have sidewalks, you can walk outside. It's a resource. You know, that was one of the reasons we thought to put that project in there as well. And then the other three you're seeing are specifically related to air quality improvements. So we have two projects in water and sewer specifically that are for the sand filter building, the step screen building, which is air handler units, And then as well with the museum, they are looking at doing air quality improvements. So out of that funding potentially is being asked for ARPA to cover some of that. So again, that's a question as we go through this budget that as the council and obviously as the city will have to think about, because if we do that, that means we're out of that funding. That funding source is gone. But these are all definitely eligible projects that would fall into that. So what you have to consider is if we're not going to use the ARPA funds to cover that, then essentially we're probably not funding those projects. Or we have to do some kind of trade-offs. We have to trade, we have to do something. So just something to consider. That's something we propose tonight to kind of kickstart the conversation. Any questions there? Does that make sense?
The Roundtree branch stabilization for Howard. So this is that kind of continuation of what we've been getting some grants for in the past? So I kind of.
Technically it's separate, but it's the same sort of a thing. It's just, this is 3 locations further upstream from where we did them before. One by the bridge at Fiesta Cancun, one at Valley Road by the water plant, and the other location is at the East Mineral Street Bridge. So that we get 50% money from the DNR for that. And so this would be the ARPA money would be our half.
But
that.
I just want to make sure, but it is still considered a new project though, because with the ARPA, you can't use that money towards something we've already started.
No, it's a new project. We received the funding authorization here this last summer for a 2-year window to do the project.
So we already have the grant funding.
Yes.
We already have half of it.
I mean, it's technically a reimbursement, but yes, we've been given the letter saying that the money is available once we complete the project.
My point was, I just want to make sure that, it's considered a new project, so we don't dive into it and all of a sudden they say, no, this is a pre-existing worker that you've done that doesn't qualify. So.
Nope, good question.
So,
Yes.
so this, the money that from the ARPA funding, the totals that I see don't add up to the total that. So this, how much are we getting from ARPA?
So there is a little bit of a difference. So there's about $708 that we're going to have to come up with
Okay.
based on that.
That's-
So yes.
Okay.
Nope, you're not missing anything there. It's basically, we looked at that. So essentially what we would do is we budgeted about 633,000, kind of looking at that. We'll find a way to make sure that we'll either make that money up or we'll decrease something by that amount to make sure we're not overspending.
Okay, because I was like 6 and 6 is 12 right off the bat.
Yeah, there you go. I heard what you said there.
Heard what I said.
I did, yes. You take your non-existent salaries.
You can take it from our salary.
No, but good catch. Yeah, there is a little bit of a discrepancy. We'll have to look at if all the funding kind of falls into that. Typically we do find savings in some things in areas, so we anticipate we'll be able to cover that.
Adam, can you explain again the Second Street sidewalk?
Yeah, so that is a project essentially that it's kind of a joint combination of a couple of entities. So obviously there was the town down in Platteville applied for a grant that we did as the city of Platteville, kind of write a letter of whatever you want to call it, support, because it is. So essentially what this is their street project is getting sidewalk that takes them pretty much to about the city limits. And then what this would do is essentially allow an extension so that it continues on and pretty much ends right at about where the new pickleball courts are, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Howard?
Correct.
So main reason again to do this is because with Legion Park kind of expanding and having the Broski Center and everything else, it is kind of an entryway into our community for events. It allows, as we've seen with Dairy Days, it would create a definite walking path where people aren't walking in the street, gives people access to obviously get there. So that's one of the reasons why the Safe Routes Committee has kind of earmarked this, I believe, as the kind of as the tier 1, number 1 project. that the planning commission kind of heard last night is this is one of the projects that they've identified they feel that would make sense for the city to fund.
So it's a short amount. How many feet?
I'd have to look it up, but it's
I thought I read it somewhere.
Yeah,
1,225. roughly.
Yeah, I thought,
1,200, some, that is probably correct. Let me see if I can,
that's just a little short piece from Legion Field
Legion
or Legion
Field,
Park to the city limits to the north.
correct. Yeah,
Yeah, so one of the things, obviously, if you look at this, we're anticipating, and we'll kind of get that into the further conversations, but they're anticipating $90,000. We're not looking at funding that entire amount. So this would require us to have to go after some type of grant funding or support, or essentially this may be a phased project where we can do what we can, and then as money becomes available, we complete it. So, that's kind of the focus, is we want to try to start getting there so that it makes sense, with that being our event center and kind of with a thoroughfare with the pool and everything else. But with this kind of recommendations, you're going to see the funding, the full funding of that, I'm not recommending. Now, again, as the council, you obviously can go in a different direction, but that's just kind of the way kind of the money played out.
Then I have one other question as far as, because I know it's been discussed a lot, is the whole broadband thing. What is the thought behind the dollar amount? I mean, has the city, is that a doable number to help as an incentive to improve broadband?
I think it's certainly a starting point. Do I think that's an acceptable number? No. That it's if you're talking about putting money in, but the question is, what could we utilize that for? Whether that's assistance with marketing. I think the number one thing that is what that provides for, or how we can assist broadband, is when we do street projects, has been putting in the conduit to essentially allow them access. I think that what this could be geared towards is either, there's potential that it could go towards marketing incentives or studies or something along those lines. But we're going to have to define that more. So I think as we kind of look at that in the coming, year or two, you may be absolutely correct, Kathy, is if that's not enough, we may need to earmark that for something else. So it's a placeholder right now. And if we feel that that's not going to be sufficient, maybe there's another source of that 75,000, as we've talked about. We've been talking about housing developers, and assistance. Maybe that's something we look at, is that 75 goes back into, those areas. Okay, so then the next slide, obviously, or the next conversation, is the city manager recommendation. So what you'll find here is what was requested is essentially what has been 100% recommended to be funded by some source of funding. It varies a little bit, but what you'll see here from the general government side, there's 4 projects essentially: the City Hall exterior maintenance, City Hall exterior metal coping, IT upgrades, and City Hall chimney repair. So when you go across, this kind of shows you how essentially the recommendation is to fund these projects. Some of them are being funded 100% by levy. Some of them are being funded by intergovernmental revenues, as we talked about with the IT project, that essentially is ARPA funding. And then the other one, the City Hall exterior maintenance, we're anticipating to be funded by general fund transfers. So that $500,000 that's being utilized to fund capital improvement projects, a portion of that is being used to go towards that project. From the police department side, there's a couple of projects that they have here. We have the citywide camera system that's being split between ARPA funding and then additional CIP reserves. That's why it's in the other sources area. The squad car replacement, that's being funded 100% out of the general fund transfers that we're anticipating, as well as the other 3 projects: the portable radios, the tactical equipment, and the pistols. So the DPW side of things, we've got the Cedar Street reconstruction. We're recommending that be funded 100% by general obligation bonds. We've got the Gridley Avenue reconstruction. We're recommending that be funded 100% by revenue general obligation bonds. We've got the Main Street culvert. That's a project that is up for discussion, but right now we have that as an ARPA funded potential. That's why it's under intergovernmental revenues. And then the remaining kind of 4 projects that you see here, we've got the highway striping, sideway repair, the 2.5 ton dump truck, and the end loader. We're recommending that we use the general fund transfers to cover those. The Roundtree Branch Stream Bank Stabilization, as Howard indicated, is a combination between grant funding as well as potentially ARPA. So that's why you're seeing it in intergovernmental revenues. And then the trail maintenance, again, for the 12,250, we are recommending that that be funded by the capital project levy. So then if you go to the next page here, this is again, just kind of rounding everything up of what we're recommending to fund in full. So we have the park mowers. We're anticipating a little bit of a breakdown with the majority of that being funded by capital project tax levy, and then a little bit by general fund transfers. Then the remaining kind of projects here are split a couple of different ways. The Woodward Field shade canopies and the rookie fields would be using other sources of funding. And as you can see here, the anticipation would be to use the Legion Park Advertising Trust to cover those two items. Then there's the Legion Park small parking lot. A couple of different sources here using capital project levy to cover some of it, a little bit of general fund transfer, and then a rest again to be by a combination of the Clayton Trust. Then we have two projects being proposed by the museum, a preservation plan, which we're anticipating to be funded by general fund transfers, and then an energy audit, which we're anticipating to get grant funding for. And again, when we can't get grant funding, that usually means the project doesn't occur. So just keep that in mind. Then we have the fire department is looking to need to do updates to their radio replacements system. So their radios are kind of at that point now where they've hit the useful life. So this is kind of a combination from three sources. This would be funded a little bit by capital project levy. The majority of it would be grants that we would be trying to get. And then potentially other sources are, we anticipate that we should be able to sell those radios to someone that could utilize them. So we're anticipating getting some funding source back from that. Then the two final projects here, we're talking about funding in full. Again, is the taxi vehicle. So that is a partnership with the federal government and through the DOT. We're anticipating getting grants for about 32,000, then 8,000 would be required by the general fund transfers. And then our airport CIP match that we have kind of tried to establish now with the 15,000 would be the other one that would be funded by general fund transfers of 15,000. So again, overall, with the recommendations of funding in full, we're looking at about $2.8 million of requested costs. And that would be split out between 174,554 coming from capital project tax levy, about 1.1 million in intergovernmental revenues, the $500,000 on the dot for general fund transfers, and 184,500 coming from other sources, and then 860,000 coming from general obligation bonds. Any questions or concerns on the recommended funding options? Yes.
One quick question, under the parks for Legion Park small parking lot, is that the existing small parking lot, or are we talking something new? So what is a small parking lot? The one by the soccer field? Or
So this would be the parking lot that would be between the horseshoe courts and the new pickleball courts. So there was an existing piece of pavement there. This would be installing about 30 to 35 stalls in that area, along with completing some electrical improvements. Essentially eliminating, when we're doing projects like this, we often like to eliminate some of our additional meters because we pay a monthly fee on each meter. So if we can run power from the Broski Center, we'd be saving that monthly fee.
I need to go look. I'm not familiar with that particular area. So
Yeah. So if you're in the patio of the Broski Center, if you think about it where the picnic tables are, that basically long shot that goes to the
it's west
street.
of that.
Correct.
Yeah,
Is that
Did you
area?
look at the swimming pool?
Yep. Is
Where
we
people
would-
are driving in now and then driving on the sidewalk.
Right.
I'm assuming this will include the installation of a retaining device so that people can't do that anymore.
Okay. So now we get into kind of the conversation of, what can we still try to fund, but may have to make some tweaks or reductions. So these are the recommendations I made for projects that we couldn't fund in full, but still want to fund some portion. So specifically, as we talked about the City Hall Phase 3 renovations, we were looking at about $150,000 towards that, reducing that by 50,000 and really just focusing on the technology upgrades that need to be made to the council chambers, as well as potentially the first floor, make Jody's area a little bit more nicer for her, but I think she likes it anyway. So But anyway, then with DPW, we have a couple of projects, obviously Hickory Street reconstruction. So the cost for that was 430,000. Again, in order to stay under the borrowing limit that we did, we're actually not talking about reducing too much. It would be about $15,000 that we would have to look at. And historically, Howard has done a really good job working with Delta 3, where our projects have typically, we find a way for them to come in either under budget or we make things work. So if we have to, we'll find a way to obviously make that work. But what we're proposing obviously is to make that a 15,000 reduction in order to continue to maintain our kind of borrowing policies that we've put in place. Street repairs and maintenance. So again, this comes directly from the wheel tax that we get. We in past have been budgeting about 120,000, but looking at kind of the overall actuals, we've noticed we haven't really been coming in at that amount. It's been a little less. So in here, we're actually looking at about $110,000 being budgeted to cover that project. Second Street sidewalk, again, as we kind of talked about, $90,000 is what's being looked at. Essentially, we'd be doing $25,000, at least starting that project and then trying to seek some type of grants to potentially cover up the rest or look at other ways of funding that. Then we have a couple here, 2 specific projects, that Pine Street parking lot and alleys. As much as we would love to do these projects, unfortunately, eventually your piggy bank runs out. So what we're looking at potentially is these 2 particular projects we're recommending to push back to 2023 and then kind of have consideration next year to see if potentially these projects would be able to be funded. The other thing that we looked at doing as well is with the 1-ton dump truck. That was about 55,000. We're actually moving that to the general fund and going to cover that through the lease payments. So if you recall, one of the reasons why we went to enterprise lease management is because the cost we were doing to purchase one vehicle, we essentially can get a lot more and kind of utilize that over a more consistent format. So looking into this budgetary year for 2022, with that $55,000 price, potentially that actually will net us about 6 vehicles in our fleet that we can change out for that same cost. So that's something that has been moved to the general fund. And obviously, when we get more into the general fund conversation of the budget, we'll explain kind of how we're paying for that and funding those items. The last thing on here is obviously the museum safety, security, and air quality. So this is going to be reduced by 7,000. It's again being funded by ARPA and Levy. So what's going to happen is I think Director Flesh and I are going to do some maybe after Thanksgiving shopping and see if we can't find potentially there were gun safes that were in there. One of the things we're looking at is if there's ways we can potentially find some that are cheaper that still meet the needs. Eventually we'll have to go Black Friday shopping. Maybe we can find something, or again, we'll do it over the course of time. We'll find ways to make that work. So that's specifically what's going on there. So as you can see here, the requested funds were about 1.9 million. Unfortunately, with some of those reductions, we're looking at using capital project levy of $22,090, intergovernmental revenues of $141,800, other sources of $110,000, and then general obligation bonds of $415,000 to stay within our limit. So what that does then is that essentially is what we are looking at funding as far as the actual CIP side of things. Any questions there?
Yeah, could I get I don't need it tonight, but could somebody email me, whoever is in charge of the lease project for the city vehicles?
Yes.
Just a short scenario on how it's working out with them and
Yeah.
have any recommendations. So.
Right. Okay, so one of the things then we obviously wanted to talk about with the council that's a little different than what we've done in year past is talk about the water and sewer CIP. So as you can see in here, what we have are, again, 2 systems. We've got the recommendations of what I think we should try to fund, and then potentially one project that has to get delayed in order to try to continue to be financially responsible. So what you're seeing in here, the first slide here, is the recommendations. So again, we have the Cedar Street reconstruction, the Gridley Avenue reconstruction, and the Hickory Street reconstruction is being anticipated to be funded by 2 different sources. One is water revenue bonds and sewer revenue bonds. Then we have a couple of different projects. We have the influent pumping design and construction. We're anticipating that to be funded primarily by sewer revenue bonds. This is kind of the new project we obviously want to talk to you guys about a little bit. You've obviously seen in the weekly updates that we provide to the council, but this is the Uw-Platteville sewer line. This is obviously something that both Director Crowfoot and the Howard Water and Sewer Department and Streets have been working on. Unfortunately, there was an issue where it failed. So because of that, that really had this kind of fall into a higher priority, which is why you're seeing this kind of come to pass after we were working on the CIP. That tends to happen. There's always something you think you got everything in here, and then a project occurs and you got to put it, you got to put some emphasis to it. So potentially what we're going to be looking at here is this would be a project that would be required to be funded by sewer revenue bonds. That would make the most sense. But obviously the big discussion point is to have some further conversations with Uw-Platteville about their assistance in the project. So there are about 4 scenarios that we're kind of looking at. And I don't know, Howard, if you want to kind of take the wheel here and give them a little bit of a update or kind of synopsis.
Yeah, it's kind of hard because I don't have anything up there right now, but right now there are 2 sewer lines. There's a line that runs from Longhorn Drive underneath the track and the practice field over to the low spot in J Street. And then from the center of the grassy area in the middle of the track, there's one that goes off at an angle up toward the Russell Hall and the tower. When we had our bad line, it was in that line down toward the corner of the field house, just north of the track, in the little grassy area between the track, the field house, and the parking lot.
Southwest corner.
Southwest corner of the parking lot, southeast corner of the field house, right in there. We had a bunch of different difficulties, but that line collapsed, and it's about 25 feet or more deep in there. Doing some research, it looks the city received an easement in 1908. And I have a feeling that that line is probably about that old. It should, normally a sewer line lasts 80 or so years. So it's done its duty, plus the fact that it's that deep. We did a little other research, and 60 years ago on the USGS topographic maps, they showed that there was a 50-foot ravine that went down through there. It was a 50-foot difference of elevation between, like the corner of Russell Hall, the back side of the tower, around where the field house is, down through the track to the bottom of the ravine on the other side of Longhorn Drive. So all of that area has been filled in the last 60 years, at least. So that's what we're looking at. So we have the 4 scenarios. They run from about $620,000 to $820,000. And they are different scenarios of either what we call pipe bursting, where you just basically put a new pipe inside the old one, but it would still be 25, 30 feet deep. We'd still have problems with manholes and everything else. There's others where we talk about possibly doing directional drilling, basically drill a 6 or 8 foot deep hole on this side and one on this side, and drill one to the other. The advantage is that if you are successful in doing that, then the new line is shallower. You can get to it and you can maintain it easier. But the problem is that because of the fill that's in there, we know that there are concrete chunks and other things in there, and we're not sure whether or not we can actually do the drilling safely without having other issues come up. And so the other options are to basically put in a brand new line around the track and the field and the practice field. And those are the ones that are more expensive, of course. But, you know, one, the lines would be shallower. And two, they would not be underneath the track or the practice field. Hopefully, the idea is we get a new easement with them and work with them so that they do not plan to put anything expensive over top of this new area. Had some advice from our attorney that basically said, you know, realistically, unless the city gave written permission for them to put these items over their easement, we could be real jerks about it, and we could go, and if we needed to, we could dig it all up, dig up the track, dig up the practice field and everything else, and say, okay, here you go, you guys fix it. I'm not sure that we want to be that way about it, but you know, we'll work through some of those issues. I'm going to be meeting with my counterparts over there on Thursday and kind of walk through some of the scenarios and kind of see what they're willing to do, what they think the best solutions might be to this, and potentially help us out with some of these relocation costs.
I'd like to get a little clarification. This issue of going from what, J Street and underneath the track?
Yeah.
Okay, is that separate from the situation that I read about in the city manager's report as far as jetting, and is that correct? The jetter got jammed and we had to hire another company to get the jetter out. Is that a separate issue from this situation?
Well, they're two separate lines, but they're related. There is one line that goes more or less east-west, you know, from J Street to Longhorn Drive, underneath the practice field and the track. Now, from roughly the middle of the grass area in the track, you go northeast up toward the backside of Russell Hall and Pioneer Tower. It was that line that had the break in it, but both lines, the easement was written at the same time for both lines, and we believe that
you said it had a break in it. Is that the same situation as where a manhole was overlooked? And so the manhole filled up and backed up sewage into the university properties? Is that the same, or is it separate or combination?
It's kind of a combination. The in that corner by the field house.
Howard, Adam wrote in his
Mhm.
city manager report that there was jetting and things that had to be done. You're talking about the same line
Yes,
or the same area.
Right,
So
Same.
it is the same
correct.
thing that Adam was writing about. Howard is just providing detail now as to exactly where these lines go.
Yeah, but this has never come to the Water and Sewer Commission yet.
No, it's coming next week.
Correct.
Yes, so, and the number you gave was what, 680,000 to something else?
Isn't it 820?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's four options that are
Right.
obviously going to be discussed with the Water and Sewer Commission as we go through the budget. What we have in here right now is the recommendation is obviously to do it, I guess, the best way and the possible, which is obviously the most expensive. But as we've talked about, as Director Crowfoot talked about, there's going to be a combination of meetings with Uw-Platteville. Again, what we have in here is a placeholder right now of how we can fund.
Yeah.
We certainly are going to, attempt to talk to them and say, because of everything going on, we are requesting you obviously fund more than what we are anticipating in here. But again, we wanted to provide something for you guys to see. If we have to fund it today, this is kind of, worst case scenario, what we're looking at doing.
Well, I'm old enough to remember the time when that area was not filled, because I was here in 1952, and then they began to fill it. I can't say the precise date, but I remember seeing it. So that's my recollection as far as development of the area. So there's a lot of junk in there.
Fair enough. Thank you, Director Crowfoot. So again, just kind of going back through the recommendations. So that's obviously the newest project that you guys haven't seen. Then, as we've talked about with the wastewater treatment plant being an amazing plant, and obviously great job by our director and staff in maintaining that, it also is 40 plus years old now. So we are starting to see that we are going to have to start doing some pretty significant improvements and upgrades to that plant. So that's where you're seeing kind of the standby generator, needing about $1.3 million for that. Then again, we have the Main Street culvert looking to be funded by water revenue bonds, the fire skimmers, that's sewer revenue bonds. As we talked about, the sand filter building that we're looking to use ARPA funds for. Boiler construction would be with sewer revenue bonds. The building again would be with ARPA funds. The next three projects would be funded primarily by sewer and water revenue. And then as you get to the bottom here, specifically the water and sewer copier, the water meter replacement program, and the safety equipment would all be funded by anticipated cash that we have on hand through reserve funding. Then the last item on here is the contingency, which would be split between the water and the sewer. So again, these are the recommended projects. So about $4.1 million worth of projects, and kind of shows you the individual funding sources there. Then the last page talks about, obviously, then again, just anticipating we are going to have to make some reductions and potentially could have to make further reductions after we get kind of the long range financial plan. What we looked at doing is obviously with the unanticipated issues we've seen with the Uw-Platteville line, we are recommending that the Mcgregor Plaza sewer be pushed back to 2023. Again, just because that was about a $500,000 project, and with an additional 820, worst case scenario project, we felt it would be prudent to look at potentially not funding that. So any questions in regards to kind of the water and sewer side of things? So obviously, as we talked about, this is going to go to the Water and Sewer Commission as part of our long range financial plan. And then if we do have to make some tweaks, we certainly will do that. But this is kind of our first kind of scratch of the napkin or recommendation for you guys.
This Mcgregor Plaza, I probably got that in water sewer. How much length are we talking about here doing?
I would have to look at that specifically, but we stopped the Alden Avenue project for budgetary reasons, basically between the Mass Water and the Edward Jones building. And so what this would do is it would start there, go up the hill, and go in the area between the car wash and the new pole that's there. And then it would go through that loading dock area. There's two loading dock areas for Mcgregor Plaza at south side. And it would go through there over to
Which avenue?
Roundtree.
Oh, Roundtree, okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You see the Main Street culvert popping up. Howard, can you explain it? I mean, is there an issue or is it that?
And it's a total of $450,000, 350 from one budget and 100 from the other. So it's off of almost $500,000. So
What this is the culvert in the low spot in Main Street between Preston and College Drive. That was last replaced in the early 80s. It's a metal culvert pipe. When they redid Main Street in 96, that pipe was only 14, 15 years old. It was in good shape. For budgetary reasons or for whatever reasons, they decided not to replace that.
Who was they? Who did the project?
I think that it was a combination of the city and the state, because I believe that was some state funding that was involved in that. That was a year or two. But in conjunction, there's a section of water line that goes under the stream right there that did not get replaced either. And so the 100,000 that I've got set here in water and sewer would replace the water line that goes under there. And then the city budget would replace the culvert. And the problem is that culvert is rusting and actually sections are separating. So we're recommending that we actually replace that metal tube with a concrete box.
All right, so we threw obviously a lot of numbers at you and a lot of stuff. So this is obviously an opportunity to kind of answer any questions, comments, concerns. Obviously, as council members, you all have the opportunity or right, to bring any projects you think that, if you think there's something that you feel should be funded differently, or there's other projects you've heard from the community that you think should be a higher priority, this would be, we certainly want to hear that. Obviously, as we start to get into the budget process, when we get any more dates, that timeline becomes less and less. So what we tried to do here was go off of what we've had in our CIP that was adopted, look at ways we could fund that. But certainly if there are, things you would like us to try to look at differently or fund differently or not fund, this is kind of the first opportunity to kind of talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly.
So the North Second Street sidewalk. So means that's going to be running in front of a daycare. Not sure that it would matter or make a difference, but I think it would be up for the city to approach them and also have, if we're going to be trying to get some grants, having them participate in writing grants means it is a daycare. Well, I think one of two of the major city. So I think that would help if we could make sure we approach them and get them involved.
That's a good
all I
idea.
had on that one.
Lynn, do you have any?
All-
This is your first go around, so.
Yeah, thank you, guys. My only concern would be that, as these, street constructions are happening, if there is a way, a better way, and I do appreciate how things have been communicated, I'm not complaining. But what I keep hearing is that people are not aware of the street changes, of things that are happening in the street, and they don't find them out till the last minute. So my only thing would be to, as this is happening, if that means incorporating, I don't know, another $100 for making signs or whatever, if we can make sure that we communicate this to the pavilions enough time so that people can readjust stuff. That's my only thing is always, I mean, this needs to happen, it needs to happen. But if it's going to be a situation with the residents getting home, if there's, they don't need to come home and then find out they can't come down the block because we're fixing the water main. So that would be my only thing, if as we do this, if they can communicate it. Other than that, no, let's make it happen.
Yeah,
My question here is, we got this document, roughly 20 pages or so.
Mhm.
And my question is this replacing an existing document or documents we already have, so we can throw away the previous ones, and this is the final one at this point?
No, so I will get you, this is essentially just the 2022 projects that were in the presentation. So I tried to make it as simple as possible. So if you want to look at what's in here, you have direct reference. You are going to be getting a finalized CIP that has everything that was adopted that's coming. The only difference is the reason that got delayed is because when we learned about the UWP sewer, we wanted to incorporate that now into that finalized document, even though it wasn't adopted. That particular project was, but you adopted the CIP, so I'm throwing that in there. So you are going to be getting a hand-bound one that will look like this, that will have all of the projects in there for the next 5 years. So that's coming.
So that'll be the final replacement?
Yes, correct. That will be the final official CIP.
But I consider at this point, this is the final one.
That's just for 2022. So right, if you want to know what we're requesting to fund for 2022, that's what's in your hands.
So Ken, if you
Well-
take this document and you take the city manager recommendation,
It goes step by,
They
line by
go-
line.
they're line by line comparing. So you can
But
take,
I'm also looking at information that's given for 23, 24, 25, 26 as well.
oh, that was on the page.
Yep. And that's possible, correct? Because if we funded something and if it's funded through multiple years, or it's one of like airport, I think would be a good example that has that, where I think over the course of the entire, 2022 to 2026, you're seeing 15,000. There are some that will have that. that
So
are
I
gonna
could
have
call
that.
this the final to date.
What's that?
I'd call this the final to date.
Sure, I like that.
Thank you.
Eileen,
This isn't mentioned at all on any of the CIP, but my understanding is Cedar Street, Gridley Avenue, and one other one. Hickory Street would be the streets that would be looked at in 2022. Just a question, Howard. We also have been allocated money through a grant for replacement of lead service lines. Is there any way to know on these 3 streets how many lead service lines there are and whether or not those people then could be contacted? Because I hate to see a new street dug up a year later because somebody on that street said, oh, I want to do that now.
Well, there are two things with that. One is all known lead service lines that we know of so far have either been replaced or the property owner, residential property owner, has gotten a letter offering them the current LSL grant. Another thing is that it's been our practice that whenever we do a street project like Cedar or whatever, we always replace the water service from the street to the curb stop box, which is, out from underneath the street. And we also take a look at that time, are we connecting back to a lead line? And if it was one that was not known previously, we immediately make the homeowner aware of it. But if they need to come back and redo that line, they only have to dig up from the house out to that curb stop shut off that's not under the street. It's actually on the house side of the sidewalk when we do that. So they shouldn't have to dig up the street or the sidewalk or any of that stuff if they decide to wait or something new, some new information comes.
Okay, good. That's all.
Kathy,
I don't really have any other questions at this point. I just want to thank you all for making this as simple to review because it's extremely complicated, but I appreciate the detail with all of the information that we need to make the decisions. So thank you. Good job.
No, thank you. I appreciate that and definitely want to give kudos to all of the staff for, this has been a little bit of a switch, I think, for some of them in regards to the process, but they definitely have been game. And, I want to give shout out to Jody as well, because she's been doing a kind of great job kind of publicizing everything and making sure that I know what I'm doing. So it looks like I'm running a PowerPoint I've never done before. So it's going good. So kudos to her as well.
So I do have one question.
Fire away.
And that is on, I don't, I've read these project or program descriptions and justifications.
Yes.
So I have a concern.
I think I know where you're going with this, but go ahead. I trust you. Go.
I have a concern about the radio replacement digital upgrade at the fire department, because it says in the justification, we are willing to submit a grant in 2021, but cannot continue to submit grants. This will need to be funded in its entirety if we don't get a grant. And we're talking about $270,000, almost $271,000 at least. So I have a concern that that is a potential 271. I mean, I don't know. It says that they did not receive a grant in 2019, and they're still waiting to hear on the 2020 grant that was submitted. I mean, so the question, it is September of 2021.
Yeah, so the FEMA grants, the AFG Assistance to Firefighter grants, they're essentially run a year behind for the federal funding. So your 2020 grant does not get awarded until they just started about 2 months ago awarding the federal money, and that process goes several months until they're out of money. So we are still in the running. We have not received a denial letter from the government yet. So there is still the potential that we could get that funding approved. If we don't, like I said, we've written for it for 2 years already in a row. If we were denied a second year, we just can't keep hoping that we get the funding to replace some of this equipment. So, we would not anticipate, if we didn't get the grant fund, that we would want an extra 270,000 next year. We would have to then try to write a grant again, or look at that would have to carry the remaining amount would have to carry over to like the next year for funding requests. So we would essentially take the 49,965,000 and maybe a little bit for if we have a couple of radios, and replace what we could with that amount of funding.
That just made me nervous, because it's like we're allocating money. And so if we allocate all this money and then all of a sudden we need another $250,000, that's over $250,000. That's
Correct.
kind of a lot.
If that will happen, you will see that will be something that will come back to the council for what do we want to do. It's just as Ryan indicated, we can fund either X.
And so,
or more.
I see that you were denied in 2019. Do they give you reasons, or,
They don't. They just either approve or disapprove. So.
And so there's nothing we can do about that?
Not really. There's a big, long complex that they choose, and you just keep reapplying and hope. The county emergency management assists with writing those grants, and we've been very successful as a county in all. I think Grant County has received more AFG federal grants than any other county in the state over the last 20 years. So we just continue, and I don't know what their formula is that they choose and rank everybody. It just sometimes it's a lottery, I think.
Yeah, I would say one thing we could look at doing is, if we are finding that we continue to not receive the funding or the grant, then maybe what would be the step is for the council to actually draft a letter that all of you would sign. And then that would be in either a future grant submission or something that we submit to the actual grant, whoever is making those decisions, and say like, hey, here's the deal. As being one of the larger municipalities in Grant County, this is an issue. Like, you know,
When have we last gotten any kind of grant through FEMA?
I would have to look, but probably a couple years ago. We've been pretty successful. I could get you that information, Barbara, if you'd like, a list of when we,
I think it's
Mhm.
good information for all of us to have because, you know, part of our job is advocacy for our city, and it's hard to be an advocate if you don't have the information. And so as we interact with people who can influence others' decisions, we need to make sure we have the information we need to do that.
I can definitely, I have that information. I can put that together for you.
So is that what you thought I was going to ask?
yes.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay. So this was a budget work session, above budget review session. Of course, the Water and Sewer Commission will look at the water and sewer portion soon. You guys are still working with Ellers on fiscal, on the financial plan. And you also will verify that we will continue to be eligible for the expenditure restraint program. I'm always very concerned that we don't lose that money. So this is the original plan. And then next week on Tuesday, at our regular council meeting, you'll be giving information about general
Yes. So essentially-
operation.
Yeah. So what happens now is, you know, taking this information now gets put into the budget. So you will see these recommendations now, you know, go into the budgetary process. As we start, as kind of Council President Doss indicated, what happens now is we start tweaking. So essentially, if we find that we're, you know, all of our kind of ducks are falling in a row and we're looking good, we're not going to make too many tweaks to the capital improvement plan because we've got that. If we come to find out that, you know, after looking at the long range financial plan, the water and sewer side of things looks a little dicey, as we talked about with the Water and Sewer Commission, then we're going to discuss with the Water and Sewer Commission kind of priorities. Okay, we need to get some feedback from not only the Water and Sewer Commission, but then I'll bring that back obviously to the council and start saying, you know, here's what was presented on the 5th. Here's kind of what we're seeing as we see things. And that'll be the process as we go through the entire general operation budget. Is what I'm bringing you next week is really a projection. It's kind of, okay, this is where things are currently at when I put everything into the bucket. There are things that, as kind of Council President Doss indicated, there's some areas that are still undetermined yet. So it's a projection. And then obviously as council members, you have the ability to provide feedback to us on either, no, we really think, you know, we would like to see a tax rate of X. Well, if that's the case, we have to have conversations about what that means. So again, next week is more just kind of a very broad overview of kind of here's what we're seeing, here's the increases we're seeing, here's how we've combated some of those increases. You know, here's potentially what has been requested by the directors as far as taking the city to the next level. And then you kind of get my recommendations of where I think we should do things and things that potentially, just like this, there's things that we have to either cut or look at. So that's where we'll be going.
Adam, if we could we get for the past 5 years, the annual tax increase? You know, like we're talking 1% equals 40.
Yes.
If you could get a history for the last 5 years to each one of us. And then for you and Howard, if, you know, keep myself, Mr. Killian and Barb up to date on the sewer. We're having our meeting next Wednesday on that one there. Which we could have prior to that meeting would be helpful, as well as the other members of that committee too. So.
All right. Well, I think we're done. So motion to adjourn.
Okay.
All right, we have a motion and a second from Eileen and Isaac. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? You can put that down as unanimous.
Got it.